Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hey, thank you so much for being here and listening week after week to these amazing stories of immigrants and the great things that they are doing for our community and their journeys coming to the United States. I am happy to announce that you can now become an official supporter of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast for just $10 a month. That's right, just $10 a month, and your support will help cover production costs and ensuring that we continue to bring powerful immigration stories to life. And as a thank you for your support, you'll get exclusive access to behind the scenes content. So exclusive content just for paid subscribers, special Q&A sessions with me, your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and bonus insights that I'm bringing to you that you won't hear anywhere else. If this podcast has inspired you, moved you, or made you feel seen, this is your chance to be a part of the growth. Your support will truly make a difference in this podcast. So you can go ahead and sign up now and join our exclusive community on Substack. The link is in the show notes and the show descriptions. And as always, the option to become a sponsor of the show and advertise your business is still available, or you can always make a one-time payment donation to the show. That link is also in the show notes and in the show descriptions. Again, I just want to thank you so much for being a supporter, for listening week after week, and for being here with me in this journey as I am on a mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz. And today I have a very special guest. I have Ray with me, and she is going to be talking about her childhood growing up in the United States with immigrant parents from Korea, but also now living in Korea. Welcome, Ray. How are you today?
I am so great. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much. And a little insight, there is a special episode where Ray actually interviews me, which was very interesting. We connected on Threads, love Threads, by the way.
Right.
Connected on Threads, and she had this great idea of interviewing me. So you can definitely go watch that episode to learn more about how this podcast started about me. But now we're going to talk about Ray. So I want to always start, introduction, who you are, what you do, and let's get into childhood, how it was growing up in the US.
Yeah, for sure. So I call myself an interdisciplinary storyteller and educator because I've kind of been a creative for the majority of my life.
Mm.
I went to school, I majored in art, and then I went to film school. I worked as a photographer, a filmmaker, a graphic designer. So just kind of lots of different creative
Yeah.
things. And I want to say like my brain works like a camera, so it takes pictures. And so I'm usually transcribing images and patterns and sequences and topographical maps. And so that's kind of how I speak. And that's why, I went into those visual, creative professions. And I was also an educator for about 15 years in the classroom, um, teaching mostly communications and multimedia related things like that. When I was growing up, I did get the message that, I was a creative person. My mother was a creative. She was a designer by training and also a singer-songwriter. And so in South Korea, she's actually quite um, famous, I guess, for being like the mother of Korean folk music. And so growing up, I was kind of proud of my mother for her reputation in South Korea. But unfortunately, that social capital and social reputation didn't translate
Mm.
over to growing up in the United States as a
Yeah.
minority. That was kind of like the background of my childhood, but I didn't grow up with my biological father, and sometimes my grandparents watched me during the summers when my mother was working in South Korea, or during the weekends or holidays, or when my mother was really busy. So that was kind of like my family unit. And it was very interesting growing up as what you like to call second generation immigrants. You
Yeah.
inherit the culture of your family, while having the other foot in society. And so you're kind of starting out in society culturally, um, as like you have no roots, you have no cultural roots in that
Yes.
country.
Yeah, I recently found a very detailed article about the experience of children of immigrants. And I was like, everything that the article wrote was like, yes, yes, yes. I will send it to you. And then I will also
Yes.
link it to this episode because it was really, really detailed of everything that we go through, whether culturally, whether identity, what, like everything. Because we have that back and forth like, am I American? Am I not? Like, because we're told you're not American enough. And then from our families, we're told we're not whatever, for my case, you're not Dominican enough. So, like, when I go to the Dominican Republic, oh, they're like, no, you're American. And then it's like, here's like, oh, no, you're Dominican. I've decided I'm Dominican. So that it is what it is. So, where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Los Angeles, California. That's where I was born and raised. And my family was from South Korea.
South Korea. Okay. And so tell us, I've, throughout episodes, I've shared like the different challenges of me growing up with my immigrant parents, with like translating and things like that, and just seeing them go through like navigating the system, even the bank system, things like that, education, like myself having to like navigate that, like even the education system, even like middle school, elementary school, and especially college. So let's talk about a little bit of the challenges you faced growing up with immigrant parents or parent.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, no, no worries. Um, so what was really challenging, I think the biggest challenge was not feeling like I had um, roots in the country. And I was also battling a lot of different things. I recently found out that I'm neurodivergent. And I also had a lot of anxiety and a lot
Mm,
of learning disabilities. I have severe executive dysfunction, and it was worse when I was younger and didn't have a mature prefrontal cortex.
mm,
And so I didn't, and I also recently learned that I don't think in the way that uh, educators want their students to learn. I think the education system is set up for top-down thinkers, and also people who process language uh, well. And in a household that predominantly spoke Korean, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to language.
yeah.
Yeah, right. And so um, I just didn't have, like, I just did not fit the ideal student. And so I was really struggling. I didn't know how to communicate how I was struggling. The people around me seemed like they knew what they were doing, and they also understood social norms. But for me, like, social norms was really challenging, not just because of my neurodivergence, but also because of how cultures like the South Korean culture navigates relationships. I think
Mm,
in South Korea, it's really like cohort based communities where, somebody from a single cohort makes an introduction to another cohort. And when you are introduced to somebody, you sort of can rely on that relationship that you have of the person who introduced you to make sure that, like this person isn't just going to be uh, reckless with this new relationship,
Yeah.
and whether they're friendships or whatever they are. And, I found that in the States, that was not common practice. And it was sort of like it was up to you to
Hmm.
make your own friendships. It was up to you to make your own communities. And that was really challenging for me. I think that was the biggest cultural challenge of being a second generation immigrant. And then I think it was just the language and not understanding and the social norms.
Yeah. So you touched a little bit about the culture norm for South Korea versus the one in the United States. And I love asking second generation is that like what cultural norm did your mom keep and what was some that was adapted, living here in the United States?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And one is we definitely kept language, right? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Korean language, but it's very hierarchical. And like there is no actual word for you, you.
Mm.
There's always a hierarchy. So when Korean people speak, there's a lot of information that's given because hierarchy is embedded in each word. And so, like, I don't know if you've seen this, but there are lots of like comedians or like films that make fun of like Asian languages, and they'll they'll be very like short, and then the subtitle is very long, or vice
Mm.
versa.
Mhm, mhm.
And you know, I feel like the Korean language has embedded in it so much information. And so that was definitely one thing that we kept within the household. And so everybody knew their place. And then I think the other thing was there's a lot of pride that I think comes with, uh, at least in my family, they had a lot of pride for who they were and what kind of social class they were in when they were in South Korea, and
Mm.
also like the kind of accomplishments that they had while they were here. And so, you know, it was a very like proud home and very culturally strong. And so it was language and like, I don't know if it's career pride, or I don't even really know what to call it, but they were very proud of what they could, that what they were able to do for the society here. And I think those were the two, I think, big things. And then I think your other question was, what are some things that they adapted culturally? And I think my mother has always been sort of like a free thinker and sort of a creative person. And so, she really enjoyed the individuality that came with,
Mhm.
having her own like time, or creating her own identity and not being boxed in as like somebody's mom, or being a woman, um, or whatever it was. I know in South Korean society there are lots of expectations of what a woman should look like, how they should
Mm.
dress, how they should speak, how they should laugh, what kind of careers they should have. But my mother really had a lot of freedom to escape those expectations. And so I want to say that we really embrace that like free, liberal identity making.
Nice. Okay, that's awesome. You touched on language, so I want to know, were you taught to read and write Korean or just speak?
Yeah, just speak.
Just speak. Okay.
Oh my gosh, the writing and the reading, I still am at like preschool level.
Girl, yes. And the reason why I ask is because of my experience too. Like I learned first to speak. And then I can't remember when or how old I was where I wanted to actually start writing in Spanish.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, you just sound it out. Like the way that the word is spoke, like the way that, yeah, the way the Spanish works is that like you literally sound out the word and that's how it is. And that's literally how I learned. He just told me that. And I was like, oh, okay. However, there are, some silent letters. So for example, hola, which sounds like it's an O sound, it actually starts with H, right? So HOLA. And so I don't know like grammatically correct like sentences and things like that. And like if I were to like read a Spanish book, it'll probably take me like a year to
Yeah.
finish it because I'm like I had to like really slow at preschool level. But that's why I asked because I was a lot older when I actually like dove into like writing and
Mm.
trying to read in Spanish and things like that. So that yeah, that's cool though. I mean obviously now that you live out there is different, but like here it was just the speaking, right?
Oh my gosh. And you know what's funny is, oh my gosh, even so is Korean is similar. Well, it is it's syllable based.
Okay.
And so like I can't spell. And so I can actually like kind of it kind of looks like I'm spelling, and writing okay. Uh but the spelling is awful and people are like, "Whoa, what is this?" And when I'm reading, because it's syllables,
Mm-hmm.
like, and they borrow a lot of words from English. So
Oh.
I'll be reading something and it'll be like, um, Christmas. I'm like, oh, Christmas. But it'll take, like, I don't know what it is
Yeah.
until I finish reading it.
Yeah. Gotcha, gotcha. Before moving to South Korea, since you're there now, did you have the chance to visit? Because I know you mentioned that your mom went back and forth when she had to work, but did you get the chance to visit with her before moving out there?
I was able to once, when I
Mm,
was, I think around the age of 13. Um, yeah, my mother brought me here over the summer. It was so hot. Actually, no, twice. I visited twice. Once with my mother, and then once she sent me to her business partner's family, and because they had
mhm.
a daughter similar age. And so it was really hot. I didn't like it. It was way before they had lots of like modern things,
Yeah,
like air conditioning. I don't know, things like that.
yeah.
So yeah, it was really tough.
What was the besides the weather, what was like cultural shock that you experienced visiting out there?
Uh, yeah. So one of the biggest pieces of culture shock for me was how I don't know how to explain this, but okay. Okay, I can articulate this. So in the States, there are lots of things that are taboo when you meet people for the first time. You don't talk about age. You don't talk about people's weight. You don't
Yes. Tell
right?
that to
Like,
my tell that to my grandma.
oh my gosh,
It's like
is
the
she
first thing
Korean?
yeah, that's like the first thing she says. I should probably cut that out of this episode, but yeah, she's like, "Oh, you're so skinny," or "Oh my gosh, you guys so fat," and I'm like, "You don't tell that to people." Okay, sorry.
No, exactly. Right. And
Yeah.
so for me, I was like, you wh- what is this? Like I think I kind of got that from like my Korean family members back in the
Mm,
States, but the fact that I was getting it from strangers, people that I didn't know, people at the supermarkets, like strangers, and I think the fact that it was so community minded, like
mm.
because when they think about somebody's appearance, it's not just appearance, right? It like reveals something about their health, I think. And
Oh.
so here it's kind of like, oh, I mean, not so much now because there's so much Western influence, but when I first visited, it was still like not as saturated with Western media. And so it was very much like, I'm going to comment to you about your weight because I feel like that is something related to your health and maybe you need to talk about it or maybe you don't know. So I'm going
Mm,
to educate you. But I really hated that, coming from the West, and knowing that those were rude things to talk about and
yeah.
approach. So I think that was like the biggest like mental culture shock. But then there were other culture shocks too, like like when I first came to Korea, like or in the States, like towels that you use after you go to after you shower are like huge and they wrap your entire body. But here they're just like they're really small and they're just like here. And I was like,
What
wait,
is
I don't
this?
know. Yeah, exactly. Like, so do I just take all of my clothes in? And so like it was really weird because, and also the way that the bathrooms here drain, it's at a tilt. So there are no like there used to not be any dividers between like the toilet and the basin and like the shower head, because they just wash the entire bathroom floor when
Oh
people
yeah.
shower,
Yeah.
Yeah. And so those kinds of things were like really shocking to me. And it's weird because I've spent about a collective 10 years in living in South Korea.
Hmm.
And I'm like, dude, anytime I can clean the bathroom and not make an extra chore out of it, that's great. And, I prefer like the wash size towels now too because they dry faster and they take up a lot less space in the washer. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've kind of become Korean.
Oh my gosh. The bathroom thing reminds me of my stepmom. She told us the story of like when she first moved to the United States because bathrooms in India are like they're like tile based all over from like
Yeah.
top to bottom, right? They're just tiles everywhere. And so when you wash the bathrooms, you just throw water and then
Exactly.
just scrub and and the bathroom is washed pretty much. And so she started working with her uncle cleaning company. And so like they would clean commercial spaces and then residencies. And so her aunt was like, okay, go wash the bathroom. And so she's like throwing water everywhere. She was like, what are you doing? You can't throw water. You're gonna ruin the walls.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's just how you do it in DR. You just throw water. I mean, everything is tile, but it's different here in the US. So that the bathroom thing reminded me of her story of that. Um, what so let's talk about what events led you to move to South Korea. You are, I think you're the second or third guest who I've interviewed that, grew up in the United States and now they're living somewhere else. And it's very interesting. Or there's one guest who also immigrated to the US and then spent a few years here and then ended up going back actually to their home country. So what events led you to move to South Korea?
Yeah, so I really felt growing up in the United States, even though I was born and raised in Los Angeles, where there are lots of Korean people,
Mhm.
I felt a lot of shame to
Mhm.
be Korean. I didn't eat the same types of foods.
Mhm.
I didn't have the same type of body. I didn't have the double eyelid that, most Western people do. There were so many. I'm also really hairy. Like,
Oh,
um, yeah. And so, like, I just felt a lot of shame around being me, which was Asian, Korean American.
yeah.
And so I rejected my culture for quite a significant amount of time. Not always during my childhood,
Yeah.
but at some point I stopped associating with my Korean culture or not wanting to be associated with it at all. And so, like I changed the way that I speak. I remember when I was younger, I still kind of had a Korean accent because even though I was born and raised in the States,
Yep.
Korean was my first language.
Yep.
And so I did a lot to adopt that, you know, speaking like I was American, right?
Yeah.
And doing everything that was American, like I remember like even learning how to sing the national anthem like an American. Like there was just a
Mm,
lot. There was a lot of shame around having had the second culture. And so, when I went to college, I was like, as an art major, there's a lot of work that you have to do on your identity. And I was like, why have I rejected so much of my Korean culture? And during college, I was starting to wonder maybe I should go to South Korea and just like learn about my heritage and
wow.
learn about my mother's legacy and my grandfather's legacy and those kinds of things. And so right after college, I got a job teaching English through the Korean government. And I taught English here for a year. And I was like, I learned so much about my culture. And I was still like, oh, I don't really think I can live here.
Mm.
And so this is actually my third time um, going
Oh,
back and forth. But this current time, oh, and by the way, when I came here after college, that's when I met my now husband.
okay.
And so, and he does a lot of like interpretation translation work, like English Korean. And so his company moved us out here right after I finished my master's in the States. So that is kind of the reason we're here is for his work.
And he's
Yeah.
Korean?
Yes, he
Yeah.
was born here, but he's also an immigrant, right? But
Oh,
he's a US citizen. He's a US citizen now.
okay. Well, we can have him on the podcast too if he wants. See how I'm always recruiting people. So moving to South Korea and trying to, be in the culture and everything, or sorry, moving to South Korea, how was that process since you were a US citizen? How was the process to be able to actually live out there?
Yeah. So, because well, the first time I moved over, it was much more challenging because,
Mm,
this was also the first time that I was sort of living and working on my own.
okay.
I was living with like housemates before, and this was the first time that I would be moving into a studio apartment by myself and also working outside of school, like the supports of a school,
Okay.
even though I was teaching at a school. But that's kind of right. And so it was very much like another culture shock for me because I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first time that I'm working. And so working in another country is very different from
Yeah.
working in your own country because there are immigration rules. And I had to get an alien registration card. It not as tightly controlled as maybe, immigrants to the United States, but still, I was made to I was told, right, that messaging was you are a guest here.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful. There were like, things they told me that I shouldn't do that should be common sense, but they have to tell me anyway, right? Like, don't kill people. Thank you.
Yes.
They're like things like that, right? That do feel kind of dehumanizing because you're like, well, that should be common sense, but I understand from a legal perspective why you might need to share
Hmm.
this, because in the event that something does happen, like, you'll deport me or whatever. And so, like, so that was a very interesting process of um, having everything extra official, right? And like, I remember even having to get my US diplomas, all of those apostilled, right? And it's
Hmm.
like you have to go to a notary and then have it identified by the State Department, and it's like such a big process. So there's like a lot of money that you have to spend on making sure that all of your paperwork is legitimate.
Hmm.
Um, and so like when I first did that, it was kind of traumatizing because it was like the first time that I was working um, and living in another country, and I was like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to do
Yeah.
something that could compromise my ability to stay here. But then, the second time around, it was a lot easier because I knew what kind of things I needed to prepare in advance. And then the third time was significantly easier because we had the help of my husband's company. So,
Okay. Do you have dual citizenship?
no,
No.
but so this is really tricky. So, my biological father is a Korean citizen. And if he were to report me as his child, I could have dual citizenship.
Okay.
Um, but, his family does not know that I exist. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So you mentioned that you went to South Korea wanting to learn about your heritage and learn more about your mom's legacy and grandfather's legacy. Could you share a little bit of what you did learn?
Yeah. So, I learned that, my mother's songs have a far reach, and that if I do mention who my mother is to people of that generation, most people know who she is. And I would like meet her friends and, people that know her, and they would tell me stories about, like, the history that her songs have had, and how many like student-led revolutions have used her songs, um, to kind of send a message to the government saying, like, we will be heard.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and I also learned that my grandfather um, was a very important engineer during his time, and I know you love history, and so I don't know if you'll appreciate this, but he during the Pak Chung-hee administration in South Korea, the authoritarian regime. Um, uh, Pak Jung-hee actually sent like his right hand man to my grandfather to ask him to build tanks for the country, to, like, I guess, annihilate his enemies, right? But my grandfather refused, basically. He said, I'm not going to create weapons um, to allow you to kill people in our country. So that's the reason he had to flee Korea and go into hiding, because if he was not going to create these weapons
Yeah.
for that administration, they were going to hunt him down. And so, like, learning that my mother and my grandfather were sort of, revolutionaries in their resistance and in their
Yeah.
messaging and in their integrity, um, kind of legitimized why they were so prideful
Oh, yeah.
um, while growing up. Um, but it also made me realize, like, that just an act of resistance is social change, right?
Yeah.
And so learning that that runs in my history or in my blood or in my lineage helped me be like, okay, well, what is my purpose in the world?
Mm.
So, yeah.
And learning these that help change your perspective of your identity and your culture and yeah. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big thing, the reason why I started my podcast is because I thought, they didn't they didn't cater to people with different thinkers like me, to neurodivergent people, to social thinkers, to conceptual thinkers. And so I started my podcast to really reform education, um, to make it more inclusive. And so I'm kind of like I have sort of that revolutionary blood in me, and that's kind of given me a lot of, I guess, push and expectation and drive to do the work that I do. So, yeah, it really
So,
did change.
yeah, so I do want to talk about your podcast. And now that you mentioned it, let's get into it. So, what is your podcast? What is the name? And tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, the name of my podcast is Homeroom, the podcast, but I'm in the process of thinking, should it just be Homeroomed, or Homeroom Ed? Because that's kind of where what all of my social and my websites are. And it's it's a podcast to rethink how we educate and prepare the next generation. And I think our education systems around the world are many of them have been adapted from the Prussian system after their revolution, and so it's all very similar in that there's a national curriculum. Teachers are trained to execute that very specific curriculum. Students are divided by similar age groups,
Hmm.
and they are consistently tested to make sure they are meeting standards and expectations. But this really goes against so many things that I'm learning on the podcast by having conversations. And one really big thing is uh, that it's very hierarchical and it's very top down and it's very control based. It's a control and fear based system that takes away students' autonomy, students' agency, and it really expects students to live their lives so they can go and make money for the economy, but it does not prepare our children, our young people, for living lives that are meaningful and purposeful. And so I am just kind of talking to people who have had that experience of going through compulsory education and college and still feeling like they have to figure out their life because they don't know what they want to do. And I'm like,
Mm,
why are we in school for 13, 15, 16 years and not have any idea of what our strengths are and
yes.
what our abilities are
Yes.
and actually have the connections and support that we need to do the things that we think we can do to make
Yeah.
society better? Why? So that is the premise of my podcast. And each season, I'm using the human centered design framework to eventually come to a conclusion, maybe in season 5, of ideas of how to actually reform education in a meaningful way.
Well, definitely got to check it out. I wish that was a resource for me when I graduated high school because I feel like I wasted years trying to figure out what I wanted to do. The same thing, like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what my strengths were. I didn't know what I wanted to do. What I was, I for the longest time, I thought I was talentless because I
Yeah.
was like, talents are like sports or singing, dancing, kind of thing. And I was like, I can't sing. I mean, I dance, but not like a professional dancer. And so I was like, so I don't know. And then also just the overwhelm feeling of the all the choices that were out there. It's like, how do I choose just one thing to do for the rest of my life? Like literally, so what I do now as a career, I had no idea that was even a thing when I graduated. And then especially this podcast, like I never thought about podcasting when I was in high school. And it's funny because I did have a teacher who told me my voice was good for radio, is what he kept telling me. He was like, "Oh, you should get into radio, like you have the voice for it." And I honestly thought that he was making fun of my voice, one, because I have a very low voice for a woman, and I've been made fun of my voice before, like telling me
Hmm.
like people, raspy voice and again low voice for a woman and things like that. So I thought he was making fun of me as well. So I was like, no, I'm not gonna do radio. And then it's like, oh, now I do podcasts and crazy. But no, I wish, yeah, your podcast was a resource back then. Cause again, like you said, like I didn't know what my strengths were. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I remember in high school, like towards the end of high school, they had us take a test. I don't know if it was a personality test, but it was just a test to let us know which like career path would be great for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our interests or whatever. And I got air traffic controlling. I
What?
was like, no. So like I for a little bit I was like, oh yeah, I'll be an air traffic controller and go to the Air Force or something and do that. And then when I really looked into it, I was like, no, this
That's a very specific career.
right? That's literally what I got, air traffic controlling. I was like, huh, okay, I guess. And then I was like, no, like I don't want to do that. Like there's like it never called me. There was no interest or anything like that. So I was like, no, I can't do that as a career if I don't know, what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then, doing research is like one of the most stressful jobs out there. And you have to like they require you to take counseling because of the
Mm.
stress and things like that. So then I was like, no, I don't want a stress driven, career. No. So but no, thank you for the work that you're doing. It is very important for I guess people like me and then like how the school system is set up. And I've actually told my husband, I was like, I feel like I think my son will probably struggle with like the norm school structure because I can like see in his
Oh,
personality that he like I can just see it. Like I don't know, like a vision of him like wanting to like not follow directions or follow rules or follow the school structure. And I was like, we're
yeah.
probably gonna get like calls from like schools and be like, oh, get your son or whatever. I was like, I can see it. I can see it already. But
Yeah.
no, thank you again for this, and thank you for the work that you're doing for your podcast. I will definitely include the link to it in the show notes in the show description, and I will definitely be checking it out and recommending it. And Ray, what are some words of wisdom that you would like to leave the audience today?
Oof. Um, in the context of, you know, belonging, I think that there's something that I read from Brene Brown, and she talks about fitting in and how fitting in comes from shame, it comes
Mhm.
from embarrassment, it comes from not feeling like you are enough. And so belonging is actually what you want to do is which is to know that who you are is exactly who you are supposed to be and to not be afraid to be that person. Um, and so instead of trying to fit in, belong.
What a perfect way to end a podcast episode, especially on an immigration podcast. Is like you are who are you supposed to be. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And where can people connect with you?
Yes, so I am the interdisciplinarian on Instagram, or if you are interested in either being a guest on my podcast or listening to my podcast, I am also on Instagram at Homeroom Ed. So homeroomed, I guess. Thank you so much, Heidi, for having me.
No, thank you.